Also quite literally neural connections between the microbiome of your gut and your brain, which is really new data, and it's really exciting.
We know that there's an issue. That is definitely the case. And we can just look at the rise of numbers in cancer and all these diseases.
The simple answer is increased biodiversity and increased communication within that ecosystem of biodiverse species.
So we can see that over the past 40 years, the soil has been depleted. They're putting so many more chemicals in there, glyphosate, which I want to talk to you about as well, and all these other chemicals. And then we are consuming that. So we know that there's an issue. That is definitely the case. And we can just look at the rise of numbers in cancer and all these diseases. But what can we do about it? Like, how can we reverse it? How can we really heal our gut so that we can thrive and not go down that route of those illnesses?
The answer is so exciting in that it's fundamentally simple. Implementation can be challenging when our planet is as damaged as it is currently, but the simple answer is increased biodiversity and increased communication within that ecosystem of biodiverse species. And I would include the human in that species diversity. And so the human cells have to be able to communicate with the microbiome. And that does this on many different levels. Our lab happens to be one of the foremost experts in the area of understanding the relationship of bacteria and fungi in redox chemistry, which is the way in which electrical current is passed through biologic, biocellular environments. It works kind of like a liquid circuit board, if you will, passaging information to and from cell to cell to keep the communication network going. So we specialize in that and have spent a lot of time bringing attention to redox signaling or wireless communication between the cells. There's also quite literally neural connections between the microbiome of your gut and your brain, which is really new data. And it's really exciting that your brain has developed a peripheral nervous system that actually has infiltrated or passed the barrier of your gut to extend itself into the milieu of bacteria, fungi, yeast, parasites, protozoa. All of these extraordinary kingdoms are represented in the gut lining and speak directly to these neurons, these afferent neurons that stick out into the gut mucosa to listen to the input from the microbiome and to give output as well. I believe there's also probably communication that goes outwards through electrical pulsation and afferent and efferent activity, which means kind of output and input from the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in our body. It innervates everything from the back of the throat all the way through the esophagus and stomach to the lungs and heart rate and all of that on the way down, and then into the colon, small intestine. Really vast amount of territory controlled by a single nerve. And it has both input and output channels to it. And it has both the fight or flight state or the parasympathetic rest and digest. And so this nerve, I think, is constantly integrating its information stream with this microbiome. And on top of that, the gut is innervated with direct neural connections back to the brain, not dependent on the vagus nerve. That's going to dictate things like the amount of serotonin and dopamine and other neurotransmitters made in your brain. And so both through the redox chemistry, kind of wireless communication, as well as the direct wiring of your neural system, we know we have this direct communication network now to the microbiome. What that implies is that we've desperately need to reconnect. If you think about your cell phone for a second, you've got a computer with a transmitter and receiver in there that is always capable of taking microwave radiation and turning it into a digital information stream and turning that into a voice on the other side of the line. So as long as you're near a wireless communication tower, you can talk to grandma on the other side of the world, and you can correlate your schedules and make sure you're updated with your employees, and whatever you're doing, you can get that all integrated, and you're part of a greater organism called community or humanity. However, if you're further than 7 miles from that closest 4G tower or further than 700 meters from your 5G tower, you suddenly lose that wireless communication and you become isolated. And we're now realizing that as we isolate our human experience in the gut, we lose the wireless communication network made by the bacteria and fungi. And that isolation leads to immediate dysfunction. Just as your cell phone stops working to reach anybody, suddenly your calendar can't update, your apps aren't updating, you start to fragment the memory of that. That isolated cell phone is really manifesting the same things that your isolated cell will when the wireless communication goes down. And so to get that up and running, we need to reintegrate you literally into Mother Nature. And so our lab has been studying the use of fossil soils to do this, where we can extract from 60 million years ago an information stream, a wireless communication network that simply hasn't existed on Earth since in regard to its biodiversity and density of information, each bacteria and fungi making a slightly different shape of these carbon snowflakes that make this liquid circuit board. And so we can go back that far and say, okay, there's like a really deep integration into ancient intelligence of nature. But we can do it through simpler ways too, in which, if you go out and breathe regularly, different types of ecosystems. I'm a huge fan of ferns. Ferns are one of the most ancient flora on the planet, and they can, dating back many millions of years, they've developed a symbiotic relationship with the microbiome of their root systems, their leaves, and everything else. And so if you're walking or jogging through a forest of ferns, and you take the time to swipe your hand beneath the leaves of that and breathe that flora that's coming off of that, all of the tiny microorganisms associated with ferns, you're tapping into this ancient intelligence of Mother Earth at that point. If minutes later you're running out through a meadow and you got wildflowers of thousands of species and you're experiencing that, and then by the afternoon or evening you're out barefoot in your garden integrating with soil directly and starting to experience vegetables and fruits and their seed pods and all of the pollen that they would produce, you can start to see how diverse these ecosystems might be and how they might inform your sinuses, your respiratory tree, and your gut back to some sort of biodiversity. And in tapping into that biodiversity, that wireless network comes back on and you become resilient on many levels. And this can really, start with something like brain fog. It's interesting that the first signs of gut deficiency or gut disability is usually neurologic. It's brain fog, it's short-term memory loss, poor sleep quality, poor sex drive, all of these things. And so as we start to think about reintegrating to Mother Nature, we find some simple steps into reinfusing ourselves with that intelligence or that resilience of her design.
And it's free. Going outside is free.
It's not only free, it's almost like filling up your bank account, right? Like you're actually going to get wealthier stepping into that nature. It's never going to stop at your microbiome. Nature's going to show you something of her most fundamental truth, which is beauty. And if you have forgotten how stunningly beautiful Mother Nature is around you, you can go out and just look at a pine cone or grab a leaf off the ground and stare into that Venus pattern that looks like, a river system from 30,000 feet. There's such beauty in the micro to the macro of Mother Nature. And that's where I think we start to accumulate that bank account at the soul level, where we start to just simply fill back up and we start to find purpose again in the beauty.
And I think that's such a nice analogy, the bank account thing, because with Wi-Fi and stress and just modern living, we're constantly withdrawing from our bank, withdraw, and it's not often that we're depositing back in. And a simple act of just going outside in nature, whenever I go on my walks, I am touching the trees, I hug trees, I pick up leaves, but you've just really inspired me to do that even more. And like I said before, it's free and it's something that we can all do that can really improve our gut microbiome.